So for those Ukrainian people, the president, army and so on, should they be weighing up more seriously trying to negotiate for peace with Russia? Is that viable? I know they don't want to ever go from a sort of position of weakness. This isn't perhaps weakness, but not with an ascendancy. But do they need to start thinking about trying to exit? And what's the sense with the Ukrainian people? I mean, we just had this story on yet, another missile strike. These will be endless. At what point do they say, give up some of the territory, it's not what we want, but let's get on with our lives?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think in terms of public sentiment, everything we've seen from attempts to hit Ukrainian population centres is very counterproductive. It just makes the Ukrainians more determined to fight. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem. What might be a problem is that if the Ukrainian armed forces don't reach their goal of basically cutting the invading Russian military in two by reaching the sea, around about, well, if not winter, then at least the start of the Ukrainian spring, then it's going to be really difficult to dislodge them. The trouble with that, of course, is that Vladimir Putin doesn't want to negotiate. He's given no sign that he wants to come to the bargaining table. And all signs out of Russia, in fact, is that they're preparing for this to go for 3-4 more years. And if that's the case, and your adversary won't come to the table, then really you've just got to keep pressing on.
And I wonder how much of this is sort of the media lens through things, or is this the reality? Because it seemed a few months ago there was more pressure on Vladimir Putin. Ukraine had been much more successful in a counter-offensive. Putin, as we sit now, is still a mile off what he thought was going to be, taking Ukraine as a country, and he's not making any progress, Russia or not. Is there still pressure on him? The Wagner group, the aborted coup, if you like, that seemed to be the maelstrom for Putin, and now the sort of talk is more about, what's happening to the Ukraine counteroffensive. Is there still pressure sitting there for Vladimir Putin?
Oh, absolutely, and particularly because the Russian model relies on large amounts of expendable people dying at the front in order to defend the, let's face it, pretty limited gains that Russia's been able to make in Ukraine since February last year. And when that demand for people continues to rise, the types of people who will be sent to the front are those from positions of power and influence in Russia. So Moscow, St. Petersburg, not just from ethnic minorities. And I think that really does weigh on the minds of decision makers in the Kremlin. And there is widespread dissatisfaction with this war. So we shouldn't assume that there's no pressure on Vladimir Putin at all.
Yeah, the commentary before was sort of to be pretty blunt about it, every body bag arriving back in Russia, is another family that experiences this war in the worst part firsthand. And that's not really decreasing, right? That's still happening. It's just that right now, Vladimir Putin appears to have shored up his support, but that doesn't mean things couldn't change quickly. Because, you on my program actually a couple of months ago said, watch this space domestically.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The one thing that we know is happening is that there's an enormous amount of jockeying behind the scenes in Russian politics. There's a widespread view that Putin has completely failed in terms of this war, that he's failed in terms of, the timescale, failed in terms of how he assessed the competence of the Russian military, and just failed in terms of the objectives. And this is breeding, concern amongst those who are powerful in Moscow that, well, if he's got that wrong, then, maybe it's time to think about a change. So there is that jockeying that happens behind the scenes. The question is, what kind of incentive do those people have to actually take action? And I think it would take, something becoming a bit more dire, like the Ukrainians achieving a breakthrough in Russian-held Ukraine, that would, further up the pressure on Putin. So I think by no means is he safe and secure. And in fact, that fragility, the longer this war goes on, is probably likely to increase as well.
Just finally, to ask you about the long-range missiles Australia announced it's buying. When you look at the capability we're shaping up to get in this area, is it something that almost gives us a sense of autonomy, that we're defending ourselves, or is this more about contributing to a sort of regional arsenal, if you like, alongside the US and playing our bit? What's the realistic capability we get out of this, if you like?
Yeah, look, I think it's both, Tom. It's, it gives us a sort of sovereign capability. We've ordered 200 Tomahawk cruise missiles. That's been on the cards for a while. And I think that makes Australia one of only a handful of nations who operate a cruise missile with 1,500 kilometre radius. And that's quite significant. But then again, in order to protect Australia's lifelines, which are all via sea, you need that range to be able to do so. So I think there's a fair portion of it that's about sort of littoral defence of Australia, but also a fair portion as well that's said, okay, Australia's developing a force that's interoperable with the US military, and that gives Australia some degree of capability there rather than just be sort of in a support role. So I think this broadens our overall capabilities and also broadens the options that we have if, in fact, the strategic situation within the region becomes really, really dire.
Matthew Sussex, always good to chat. Thank you.